The opposition questions the government's handling of the failed ZOSO bill. And internationally, US and Iran continue high-stakes indirect talks in Geneva. Now for the details. Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar says she has been invited by Donald Trump to attend a leaders' summit in Florida on March 7th. The Prime Minister disclosed the invitation after meeting U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the margins of the Caribbean Community Heads of Government meeting in St. Kitts and Nevis. Persad-Bissessar said discussions with Rubio focused on regional security, including Haiti, Cuba, and Venezuela, as well as energy cooperation. The Prime Minister also said the United States has agreed to support Trinidad and Tobago's search for partners to help reopen the former Petrochin refinery. She said several expressions of interest have already been received. Following the meeting, Rubio posted on social media praising TNT's cooperation in countering drug trafficking in the southern Caribbean Sea. The government of Venezuela has rejected comments by Persad-Bissessar after she described Venezuela and Cuba as dictatorships during the CARICOM summit. Caracas said the remarks were inconsistent with the integration spirit of the Caribbean community and could damage bilateral relations. The Venezuelan response follows reports in regional media that the Prime Minister maintains a tense diplomatic relationship with Venezuelan officials. Political scientist Professor Hamid Ghani defended the Prime Minister's position, saying her criticism reflected strong leadership and regional democratic values. Opposition Senator Marvin Gonzalez is questioning whether the government allowed the proposed Zones of Special Operations legislation to fail in Parliament. Gonzalez suggested the administration may have expected the bill to collapse so it could later blame crime levels on the opposition. The government had argued that the legislation, supported by Minister of Homeland Security Roger Alexander, would have given security forces stronger powers in high crime areas. The bill required a special majority in the Senate, but failed to gain enough support after proposed amendments were rejected. The government maintains that the measure could have helped address rising violent crime. Internationally, indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran are continuing in Geneva in a bid to prevent military escalation. The talks are being mediated by Badir Abu Saidi. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi leads the Iranian delegation, while the U.S. team includes Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Presidential Advisor Jared Kushner. The negotiations come amid U.S. military deployments to the Middle East and threats by President Donald Trump to strike Iranian targets if a nuclear agreement is not reached. Iran insists it will not develop nuclear weapons, while the U.S. continues to push for stricter limits on uranium enrichment and regional security guarantees. Tensions remain high, with analysts warning that failure of the talks could trigger wider conflict in the region involving figures such as Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for you, wherever you are looking at the program and continuing to look at us. I'm Andy Johnson. Let's just tell you some things. I'm looking at a book, the cover, which says Steel Pan Vibrations, Unlocking the Human Mind. The author of the book is Dr. Savitri Ramprasad. She's here to talk with us about the effect of pan. At least that's my interpretation of what I've read and the discussions I've had with her. And we just had a stirring discussion before we came on air, and I met her at one day in the offices at TTT, and she talked about this book. My understanding of it is that pan music does things to us that we probably don't have a way of recognizing, and she's done the work to tell us why. Dr. Savitri Ramprasad, good to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming. I'm going through the book. I made some notes about some things that I wanted us to talk about. The voice of the pan is the voice of the people. You quote somebody as saying that. Let's just talk about that.
Yes. So, you know, there is a popular Latin saying, Vox Populi Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God.
Yes.
And if you look at Trinidad community, the pan community in particular, they would have faced so many adversities, but there was something about the instrument, something about the sound that was so much more alluring than the dangers and the ostracization that they were facing, that they themselves guarded their voice to create this instrument. So that is why I put a spin on it, because if we look at the steel pan fraternity from its gestation, you would have realized that within the community there was some need for expression, some need for emotional release, not necessarily trying to build some sort of social accepted structure, but something to help them cope with the challenges that they would have been experiencing within the society, the post-colonial society that they were in. And they chose to pursue this relentlessly. And anyone who is in pan would tell you that if you really get into playing pan and that pan jumbie holds you, you pursue it relentlessly. In the same way that I told you that I started playing pan in 2002, and I graduated with my PhD in 2022 without stop. There was no way that I was going to let go of this.
That's 2 decades. And
yes.
That is usually the time. If you pursue it, that's usually the number. Or you came in sort of...
I came in as an adult.
Yeah.
I had young children at the time, and I went to Dattatreya Yoga Center and I saw a small pan side was playing, and I was really fascinated, and I really wanted to play. I waited 2 more years until 2001, and then I joined. I was fortunate enough to be able to go with them on their first trip to India in 2002. And there, in South India, a large stage, I was asked about the pan and I realized I did not know enough. So I came back to Trinidad. UTT was not a thing at the time, but I went to Renegades, and Professor Kujo was teaching steel pan history, and there was some rudimentary playing, so I attended.
Professor Salvin Kujo?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was my first experience of actually being in a panyard ever. So I went during the July-August holiday, and I was the only adult. Everyone else was children. But I continued looking for ways because I realized that there was not a lot of research on the instrument in isolation of people. And that is what my work is. My work is looking at the instrument in isolation of people.
Describe what that means.
Okay, so if I quote the references that I would have looked at, maybe about 29 published books, 184 dissertations, 200 plus articles on a pan, all of them talk about this person did that person did that, and another person did a third thing, which is all very informative, very useful, and good groundwork. However, what I looked at is the instrument in isolation. So the 4-note pan, what was the effect of the 4-note pan? What were the notes on the 4-note pan, which was tuned to the bells of the QRC, was tuned to the QRC bells, which came from the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. Spree Simon played a 14-note pan for Carnival. What were those 14 notes that he was playing? How did it affect the society? And I drew a parallel hypothesis where I looked at the Rite of Spring and the premiere in 1913 in Paris. And because people were not accustomed to that sound and the type of intervals that was being played as well as the amplitude, a fight broke out in the theater. So I started to think, what if, because for the first time in human history, you had pitch percussion on one sheet, and that is the 4-note pan. What if rudimentary tuning and the type of materials and the size of the drum that was being used was affecting people's mind, so that there was a false positive in that in labeling the society as violent, whereas they might have just been having that same sort of effect that the Rite of Spring had brought up in the Theatre of Paris.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's revealing some of what you're saying, you know, and it's triggering some things about, you're talking about peace and tranquility, when in fact, what we understand was a march from that to where we are now in terms
Yes.
of the steel ban and who it influenced.
Yes. So you see, the thing is that you can't look at a society in isolation, or a group, any subgroup in the country in isolation. And while I've had people say, yes, Tambu Bambu had riots, it was few and far between and insignificant enough to not really be reported as a actual big thing in the way that anyone walking with a pair of pant sticks was thrown in jail instantly, because they were considered such misfits of the society. So when I said I looked at the pan in isolation, then let us truncate to 1951, where everyone was preparing their own pans to go to England. And I had an opportunity to have an email conversation with Sterling Betancourt about that, the tuning and things like that. So I did look at what were the changes in tuning. So in 1951, Anthony Williams would have tuned the octave. That is, if you have C, one C here, and on the side of the notes, he would have tuned 8 notes higher. Now in music, you try to keep intervals as small as possible. So if you had something that is so wide, when you play that note, you'd have that ringing, raw pan metal sound, as well as you would have had so much samples of disharmony coming into your ear, even though it was sounding okay. So as the tuning changed, as the finishes changed, because a painted pan has a different vibrational quality than a raw pan or than a chrome pan. So I addressed all of those things. So that is what I meant, that my research was looking at the instrument in isolation. Okay.
In chapter 1, for instance, you talk about building on the foundation of intellectuals, and you put that in the period 1938 to 1965. 1938 somehow is a similar point. That's where the action started.
Yeah, the forward pan. Yeah. It started then. And that would have been actually the first time in human history, because if you look at the history of instruments that would have existed internationally, you would have had percussion like the tambourine and that type of thing, or you would have had percussion like a drum. But you had no instrument that was created with more than one tone that is tuned on a single sheet of metal. So history was created for humankind in 1938 when that pan was invented.
Yeah, and I read something about a man named Victor Toti Williams, who was the first person to tune a pan. That's my question. Was he?
He was, yes. He was the 1938 guy.
Yeah.
At least he is credited. Now, there is a lot of controversy about facts when it comes to steel pan history. And I think any researcher is wise enough to understand that if you can get 2 or more forms of verification for a bit of information, then that can stand on reason. So my verification points to Victor Toti Williams as that person.
Yeah. I want to come back to your talking about Tony Williams and Anthony Williams. That's 1953, and he created the spiderweb pan.
Spiderweb pan. Yes, the spiderweb pan was it was definitely ahead of its time, in that it superimposed the circular fifths, and there was now adjacent notes that were harmonically sensible. But what the problem was that there was only one line that is separating each note. So to tune them, there was a lot of interference. And that is when Bertie Marshall and Lincoln Noel decided to separate it, reduce the amount of notes, and create more spaces in between. And that is the forerunner of the design that we have now. It's unchanged.
Yeah. How many people know that this man's name, his real name was Elliot Manet, and it was Ellie Manet.
How many people know that?
His real name was Elliot.
I think a lot of people know. I think a lot of people who There are a lot of very knowledgeable people about what I'm saying. It's not rocket science and it's not unheard of. It's just that the way in which I gathered the information and put it together in this book is a little bit new. You know, it's out of the box.
Sound development in Pan, 1938 to 1972, 74, some new development. My question is whether there's been any new development there. But talk about that period, say 1938 to 1938 is a seminal time.
Yes,
yeah.
It is definitely. So some of the tables, most of the tables that are in my book have never been seen before. And the one that you're referring to, which is the sound development in the Pan, I traced all of the significant years that something significant would have affected the sound of the instrument. Whether it is that the size of the drum changed, whether it is the way in which they were sinking or raising the drum, whether it is the shape of the notes, because the epicycloidal note is also very unique in terms of how the steel pan produces acoustic vibration.
Epicycloidal note.
Yes. That is the kind of egg-shaped notes that you see that on the inside.
Yeah.
That is very significant in that it's an optimum shape for the vibration of that note to move over the open spaces and ignite other notes at the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of research was done on this actually before the pan was conceptualized in Trinidad, 200 years before. It was looked at by a German physicist in terms of the efficacy of the epicycloidal shape on metal. But in addition to that, there was also some experimentation that was done here in Kariri in 1976 to 78 on the instrument.
On the pan?
Yes, on the instrument as well.
Yeah, you said something about 200 years ago. What was happening
Oh,
then?
yeah, 200 years ago. So this, I can't take credit for this idea. I saw it in a book called The Ring of Steel by a gentleman called Cy Grant. I happened to come across this long before I started studying, which would have been before 2009. And he drew reference to a German physicist by the name of, I'm going to pronounce it probably wrong, is Chladni. And what that gentleman did, he threw sand on metallic sheet and he drew a violin bow across. And the sand took on geometric patterns. So in that book, Cy Grant did draw reference to some of the similarities. When I started to do my master's, I delved very deeply into it. I contacted University of Berlin, the Berlin External Office, but they had been so flooded with requests. But I did go through...
Not about pan, about other things.
About the vibration, sound, acoustic vibrations on metal sheets. But you see, that lines up directly with the pan. So there are six drawings that is acoustically correct in that it was drawn in terms of how the sun arranged itself on a metallic sheet 200 years before.
Wow.
Pan. Yeah.
So there are other instruments which are founded upon metal sheets. Pan is not the only instrument.
There are other instruments that use metallic vibration. So there's an Indonesian instrument called the gamelan. And of course there is like percussion, like the snare and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's not pitch percussion. That is, it doesn't sample more than one defined tone on one sheet of metal. The pan is unique in that sense.
Yeah. In chapter 2, you at least my understanding is you sort of headline it.
Yes.
Caught in a perfect storm. Let's talk about what that means.
Well, you see, we have this instrument, and it's a gift to the world. And I think that in our enthusiasm to have it accepted and elevated, it's important that while there is a large movement of players and tuners and bands, it's very important that alongside that, we develop the research foundation that allows us to move into a wider scope on an international scale. And while there, like I said, I was able to source over 180 dissertations that has been done worldwide on pan.
180?
Yes, I think it was 184.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Yes, including
that's
from France. I actually spoke to the lady who had done some work just last week Friday. She was in Trinidad, and one from Venezuela and from different areas that I had to have translated. But you see, for us to build a very strong foundation for the instrument moving forward after you and I, 50 years from now, we do need to have a grounding in knowledge. So that is what I talked about, caught in a perfect storm, because the pan is being widely accepted everywhere. But how is it being widely accepted? If you look at what I wrote, that most schools have it to fulfill their traditional music requirement, or they may play what they call Caribbean music, right?
Caribbean
Caribbean music, which, you know, that in itself is an insult. But if you think about the instrument by itself in isolation, it has permeated so many different cultures, not based on Caribbean music. So it's based on its sound. So we have now relinquished the deep study of the instrument itself to the fame that it's starting to build from this international acceptance. But there is a limit to the edges of that research.
And you did some of the writing, but you checked out pan in schools in Europe and in the USA.
Yes. I was very thorough in that I have to be, because this is 100% a new concept that is being tested and a new idea that is being put forward by me, it is very important that my argument is as airtight as possible, that I am not shown to be relaxed and I'm not shown to be doctoring any information in my enthusiasm to have it accepted. Because what my research shows is that the power of the pan can probably be much more influential on the human mind if it does not play music.
If it does not play music?
Yes, if it's just playing sound. Any sound that has no cognitive hook.
I'm trying to
yes, I know, it's 100% different from what is in norm. You see? It's like anything that has been developed within a certain conceptual idea. To remove yourself from that concept and go into another concept requires a whole mental shift.
All right, so in fact, there is a sort of a testimony by a lady who was somebody who was put to listen to, this is the tuning, the performance of a pan, and you had these things in groups, and this person is from group F before the first session, and this person is saying, I'm currently filled with a number of emotions such as anxious, excited, proud, concerned, focus. That was before the first session. So she's somebody who's going to be listening to pan music and then report, the effect it had.
Okay, so what I did a qualitative test.
Yeah.
And it was semi-longitudinal. So what I selected, the piece that I selected to play was just 2 random scales. Actually, they were the parent scales of what Spree would have played, tuned his 14-note pan on. And when I played that, they were not consulting each other. So they just, when they came in and they sat down for the first session, they didn't know what to expect. So I just asked them, write whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, whatever you observe about the room, whatever, because this was during COVID. And they did that. And then while I was playing, they were also encouraged to write. So it wasn't like they went into some deep meditative state. They were listening to the sound, and they were unable to interpret or add any words to it because it was not a melody that they would be familiar with. And they were able to write and note things about themselves, thoughts that randomly came up in their mind. And then when I stopped, I asked them to continue, however, to map their mind. That's basically what I did. By the second session, there was a sort of Pavlov conditioning that was taking place, because people who felt really good during the time that I was playing and who felt the lingering of those positive feelings afterwards now had an enthusiasm from the second and the third session.
All right, and because so in the third, after the first session, the person is saying, excited to hear live music, happy and jolly as I am listening to the sweet sound. I am now feeling a tad saddened because I miss playing, but yet it is refreshing to hear such lovely sound. This has totally brought back memories of my days playing and why I love playing the pan.
Yes.
That after the first session.
That is after the first session. But now my focus group, my testing group, included people who have no association with pan, as well as those who previously had association with pan. So I didn't measure that. I measured gender differences, age differences in adults from 18 to 50 and 51 and over 70. And I also measured who had a history of attending pan shows, who would have played pan even if they played when they were much younger, who would have been going from panyard to panyard. And there were people who would have had no association and would never have seeked to even listen to a pan piece ever. So that it was a good contrast in terms of measurement.
And this was well, certainly a woman in the age range 40 to 49 years old.
Ah, okay. So this person, yes. So I don't know them by name and number because of course there has to be anonymity. They would have signed.
Yeah. The participant had played the pan prior to the exercise, attending pan shows and listening to pan recordings before the study, and that person liked the sound of the live pan as presented in all 3 listening exercises.
But surprisingly, there was no difference between people who would have actively participated in playing pan and those who had, no attachment whatsoever. There was very little difference in the way in which their emotions, their thoughts, and their feelings and their mental resolutions measured against each other. So it means to say that if you went into a brand new population that has no exposure, in particular, you can expect by extrapolating what took place here in my study, you can expect that that can take place on a different level as well.
Yeah. I wonder if you could go back to how the pan as an instrument was. At one point, it was sort of like an upside-down cone, and then after that, it became sunken inside and so on. What made for that?
Well, there were a number of things. One of them is the fact that when they made that convex shape, it was a different size drum. Because I was in touch with Bermudas to find out if they had in their archives copies of the biscuit tins that would have been used way back. And they do actually have it. But again, I wasn't able to go in and view it because of COVID restrictions, and afterwards I didn't pursue it. But it is there. So the difference in the size of the drum, the metal composition, the surface area of the drum matters a lot, because then it really dictates how many notes you can actually comfortably put into a pan. And if you speak to older pan tuners, they would tell you sometimes they would be making their own pans. This is like in the early 50s or so. And they would be playing it, but the pan didn't have that sort of, it did not have the way in which they were tuning. As I said, it was rudimentary. So they would be playing a note, and by the time they come back to practice, that same note is playing at a different note. So they would just have to make an adjustment on this spot.
Yeah, let's go back to Mr. Toti Williams. I'm just going to Victor T.O.T.I. Williams. Was he the first person to tune a pan?
Yeah, so he is, in all of the writings, he is credited as the first person who started that tuning. Now, you would have noticed in my book that I had some contact with the African Ethnomusicology Society.
Yeah.
And I have a table in there that looks at, and this is in collaboration with Choktas's book, Rituals of Power and Rebellion, that identifies all of the different areas that people would have come to Trinidad from Africa. And with the Ethnomusicology Society in Africa, I was able to align what was their instrument making skills at the time that they would have come to Trinidad. So they would have come here empowered with certain types of knowledge that they would have been able to pass on. So the fact that the first 4-note pan was tuned accurately to at least as close as possible to the QRC bells is not, a miracle in itself. It means that they would have come from a line of skilled instrument makers anyway.
Yeah, so
That's why I said building on the footsteps of masters, because I think that the narrative is very often that, suddenly this idea and knowledge about creating an instrument and creating a brand new thing in the world just came out of nowhere. Yeah. And I don't think that enough people acknowledge the amount of skill as well as the firm foundational background that was maintained, even in spite of colonial occupation.
Yeah, and some of it emanated out of the instruments that people came here with from Africa and so on.
Well, actually, if you look at the writings of Dr. Carmichael's wife, who is one of the few people, she wrote in one of her books that the only musicians on the islands were Africans. So there was a time that they were the only musicians who were here, and they picked up on every possible opportunity to express themselves. But you see, it goes beyond what I wrote here. So if you look at some of the writings of the early Africans who would have been instrumental in the abolition of slavery, like the works of Olaudah Equiano, he talks about his life as a prince in Africa and about the...
What was his name?
Olaudah Equiano. Yeah. He talks about his life as a prince in Africa and when he was kidnapped, but he talks about the music and the type of culture and society that they had, because these were some of the foundations that was used in the abolition argument, which of course is contrary to what Dr. Williams said, which is abolition came about because they found a different way to make sugar, but still.
All right, I think we could go back to where you talk about being caught in a perfect storm. As to how are we getting out of it?
How are we getting out of it? So as I said prior to us coming on air, this is a 100% new concept, but I alone cannot develop this. I really do need help. I need support. I need people to also get on board and realize the value of what I've uncovered. I would have given a couple statistics. One of the statistics that I gave is that the world wellness market is $6.3 trillion per year.
The world what?
The world wellness market.
Wellness market.
Wellness.
Yeah.
Right? And under that wellness market, about $400 billion are brackets that the pan can fall into a wellness market. I think as a country, if we can, as a society, get behind repositioning the pan in a different concept, in a different space than what it has already traditionally developed, it means it will only enhance the narrative for the instrument.
Maybe that might be a better remedy for wellness, because I saw a doctor, my friend, Dr. Gerald Singh, saying, he wrote a piece that I just saw on the wires. The wellness industry is not interested in people getting well.
Right. Well, you see, the alternative wellness industry is very much empowering the individual to take their own health journey into their own hands. Now, if you look at in chapter 9, my findings, and if anyone follows what I did in this book, they can also do the same for themselves, which means that they can individually affect the way in which their mind approaches their life. And that's basically, I mean, your whole life is according to how your mind sees it.
How your mind sees it.
Yeah. But on a national level, I think that if you also looked at some of the statistics, I think there's about 11 or 14,000 sound music therapy courses being offered at a tertiary level.
In Trinidad?
No, internationally.
Internationally.
There isn't, I don't think there's any in Trinidad. However, I would love to see if steel pan sound therapy starts here in Trinidad. If that becomes an area of study and an area of professional qualification, that people can come from abroad and come in here and start learning how to be steel pan sound therapists. That is one of the segues for us to get into the wellness market on a tertiary level.
Yeah, I think from what I drew from when you referred to pans in schools in Europe and the USA, I mean, per capita, they're much more there than here.
Yes, yes, because like I said, I did come across a list. It was given to me by Dr. Kim Johnson.
Yeah.
It wasn't compiled by him, but there is a comprehensive list of at least over 900 schools in North America and Canada that has...
In the US and Canada, because, yeah.
Well, yes, yes, in US and Canada, sorry, that's right. In US and Canada, that has steel pan, some sort of steel pan program, whether it is an after-school program or whether it's part of their music program. And this is not counting, of course, anywhere in Europe or anywhere in Asia. And you have pan in South Africa, you know, so I mean, it's everywhere. It's just that I don't have a count of it, you know.
But it's there.
It's there, and it's there for, and the concept is there for us to move into. But like I said, it's not some, as I do try my best within the limitations and the allowances that I can manage. But I think for this to be truly, to take really strong root and to open a whole new area of application, it needs to be a group effort.
Yeah, and this lady who you had as one of the persons listening to this stuff and recording their feelings, she said, after the first session, I feel at peace with myself after listening to the sound and happy to know that I love music as much as I love life. This is somebody who was between 40 and 49 years old.
There was another sample, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. There was another sample of a gentleman, and I would have traced development in his narration, sort of like a Maslowian development, in that in his first narrative, his narrative was centered around him going to pan yards in South when he was a young man, and how they would have pans in dances and things. He was over 70. And by the second one, he was talking about foreigners who had come to the country and when he would have taken them around. And by the third session, he was talking about pan on an international stage. And if you really were to trace it, it really goes along a sort of Maslow's hierarchical development in terms of the way in which he mentally went through these scripts. So there's so much more that is in the scripts that I was able to uncover that was unexpected as well.
Where do you think we go from here? Where should we be going from here with this kind of scholarship?
I would very much like to see if we can incorporate a serious steel pan sound research in terms of isolated on the instrument, building on what I have done. I also have more ideas that I won't really discuss openly, but I do have a number of ways that I think that we can move forward if we have a serious research center, even if it is attached to the university, as well as a tertiary level study program that is developing professionals in this field. Because if we develop professionals in this field, we can start to infiltrate the wellness market internationally. We also need to have a grounding, which is a best practices or research grounding that is focused on people contributing what they have studied, researched, and end users paying to use that research all in one place, but hopefully centered here in Trinidad.
What made you embark on this journey to begin with? I mean, you're not somebody who was playing pan.
I started playing pan in my late 30s after my daughters were born. And it was, I was very, I broke away from the norm to do this. remember I told you I grew up in Trinidad, but not in a pan society,
Yeah.
not in a pan community. I also grew up with a lot of heavy Eastern influences. Yeah. One of the foundations of Eastern thought is the idea of sound healing. It is an established thing in India. It's called Nada Chikitsa, which means the power of sound, and the power of sound to transform the human mind. So it is something that was not foreign to me, and I knew about it. And I had started doing research because I also learned to play tabla, and I learned Kathak, and I learned North and South Indian ragas. Okay. So I actually had started doing some research on my own, that what is the power of different sound combinations, and it was not at all based on the pan, because I hadn't started playing pan as yet. I did it when my elder daughter was a baby and computers were new in the country. So I was able to go to a public space and use one. And in pursuing that, I came across a writing by Dr. Anthony Achong, who was a physics teacher in UE. And he was talking about the sound of the pan, and and I glossed it over. I didn't even pay it any mind. But when I did eventually get into performing, and I went to India the first time, and I saw the way a society that is not polarized by particular groups dealing with the pan, I saw how widely they accepted the instrument. And then I happened to go again in 2005 or 6, where I played as a solo performer to a crowd of about 6,000. Pan. But I was playing Indian ragas, so I was very nervous because they have very strict rules. And I was so nervous that I made mistakes with their music. However, afterwards, a statement was made by the resident Swami, Trinidad Steel Pan Healing Sound. And I was standing on that stage in Mysore with all these 6,000 people listening to me. And I was thinking, what if Trinidad Steel Pan really has a healing sound? What if it is more than just an instrument for creating music and jumping up and, that feel-good thing? What if there's different aspects and avenues about this instrument that is so hidden in plain sight that it's just a matter of someone willing to put in the energy and the time? And I would tell you, being a PhD is very tedious. So to put in the energy and the time to prove that the Trinidad Steel Pan has a healing sound. So that's what it is.
What would you see as, did you see as the odds of embarking on a journey such as this, coming out in the way?
Well, first of all, it's selling my concept. The idea that you don't actually have to play music on a pan to get a whole lot of benefit from it is really left-wing. It's really way out there. It's out of the park, because it's not what it was developed for. And diehards would say I'm talking rubbish. So that's the first hurdle is for people to understand that there's so much more that this instrument can offer if we are willing to look at it in a different way, and if we're willing to put it in a different category. The second hurdle that I have personally encountered is my lack of involvement in any strong pan society. That is, that I didn't grow up in a yard and everybody doesn't know my name and they want to know why I would isolate myself and sit and read this and write this stuff. So I think my peer acceptance is a little bit of a challenge. Those people I've spoken to are very open and very supportive, but I don't know if they're mentally ready to shift away from what they've already accepted the instrument to be. Which is why I feel that if we move into the world wellness market, there is a lot more fertile minds there. The third, of course, is institutional, because whereas government dependency is not really the objective, I think understanding limitations of a single individual trying to now spearhead a whole new area of pan in isolation in a third world country with no real significant say-so, it's a little bit of a challenge. So it would be really good if I can get a team of people who would be willing to work on an influential level to push this narrative, because I think that as a country, we would open new avenues for ourselves.
Will you talk about deficiencies in existing literature and research on the issue, on the instrument? And so
yes. So I am the only person who looked at this in the world. So if we let that sink in, so many people says the sound of the pan is wonderful, pan have a jumbie, when you really get into pan, you just wouldn't let it go, you know, all of that. But there's nobody who looked at this. So it really means that there is avenue for more to be done. The person who I spoke to, I mentioned earlier, from France,
yeah.
She was looking, excuse me, at the layout of the double tenor and what she considered to be an illogical layout of notes and why people are able to memorize patterns and play so easily. Her whole PhD was that. That is amazing to me, because she belongs to a research foundation. When I was speaking to her last week, and she said that her whole position that is institutionalized by the French government is to just sit down and study the pan. She has gone to 150 panyards. She's been sponsored by the institution to visit 150 panyards and simply take pictures of the note layout, to make notes of how there are differences in the note layout. And she has 80 different designs that exist. Now, if we sit down and think as Trinidadians,
what do you think designs? You mean the look of the
layout? Let us say you have a six base,
yeah,
where you place the notes is different from one yard to another. Or if you have a double tenor, where you place the notes, or maybe on your guitar pan, how you place the notes, it's different from yard to yard and maybe from country to country. I can't recall if she went to other countries, but she definitely came here. But you see now, the repository of her research is housed in France. It's not housed in Trinidad. And while I don't want to sound in France, at the research center that she is employed by the French government. So while I don't want to sound exclusive, this is what I mean by that the depth of research is not really, the berth is not very wide. It's quite narrow. I read so many dissertations. I read, lately on social media, there's been some conversation about the finance of Carnival, the financial contribution of PAN and MAS and things like that. But there are many dissertations that has looked at that. It's just a matter of getting it. Even to source it, I got it from a fellow in Alaska by the name of Ray Funk. I was not able to source all of the information here in Trinidad.
So somebody in Alaska,
yes.
has files on.
He has comprehensive collection of all research done internationally, probably the most on the pan.
What is he doing in Alaska?
Oh, he's an American and he's retired and lives there. So I actually, when I submitted my dissertation in 2022, and it was approved, and I did my oral defense, I did my due diligence and I sent him a copy of my own as well, because I was able to source everyone else's from him.
So there's a lot of work, I mean, you know, that is happening here and there, and we don't know about it and we should know.
I think that Trinidad is a society of intellectuals. I really do believe that we operate within the limitations that we have as a small country on the world market, and in looking at investing in what can bring the greater amount of good to the large amount of people. I'm not one to sit down and bad talk the government and pelt stones and say, you know, more should have been done,
this and that,
and why you didn't do this and why you didn't do that. Because I think that when you're sitting in a seat of governance or of opposition, your vision has to be very wide. It's not really just based on one group and where we think one group can go. So I always applaud past efforts. And I think that whatever would have been done within our society, even if it was just having free schools or good roads or fairly good roads or subsidized electricity and water, it was done for the good of all the people. However, now that we now have reached the stage as a country that we have to micromanage our resources, I do feel that there is avenue to have multiple income streams within this country.
And this could help do that.
And this could help do that.
I have a note here from something you wrote on page 31 in the book, Red Box.
Red Box?
Yeah.
You want to?
I'm not sure. Well, no, that's the only note I make. I wasn't sure.
Maybe you should flip to page 31, and maybe it's one of those pull quotes of something that I would have written inside.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the meantime, so you looked at I imagine this year's panorama, and so how do you judge? My sense is that you are a different kind of steel band music judge from the ordinary fella. Either you like Despers or you like.
Well, you know, first of all, I would not put myself in the position to judge because I really like everybody playing band. If somebody was to walk in here now and just start to play some rudimentary 5 notes that they learned, I love listening to that. Or this is the red box you're talking about?
Yeah, most of the information that circulates about the effect of pan is unsubstantiated. This study provides a definitive proof. Somebody's saying that.
So that red box this points to what is called a phenomenological study. So the phenomena that we have, the narrative that we have on the ground about the pan has not been tested until now. Now it's tested. So if you went outside and say, listen, let me tell you something. I know that if you listen to the pan, it will affect the neuroplasticity of the brain. And I could say so because the research has been done. No rum shop talk.
Can you just go back over to the extent that we talked about it, go back over
sure.
in the final moments we have about the significance of a study such as this?
So many years ago, I went to a business seminar in Hilton, and I was privileged to sit on a table with someone from Peaks who had developed the Peaks air condition, someone from College Health Foods who had developed the whole alternative college health food line, and someone from Open Bible who was talking about the reach of the Pentecostal church and the umbrella of the church in providing for smaller churches. I was a novice and I just like to sit among big thinkers. So I went in and I sat and I was listening to them. And each one of those persons was basically describing that their core product, let's just take College Health Foods for instance, it's a religious organization, but they believe in a certain type of eating. So they have spun off a whole industry of vegetarian-based products.
When you say a certain type of eating, what do you mean? As opposed to what
they
you
believe
consume
in vegetarian consumption, right? So similarly, you have the steel pan industry. It has taken root, it has acceptance, it's proliferated all over the world. But that is not to say that that is the outer edges of its limitation. This instrument, this concept, and this research that I have done can lift the whole concept and pivot into a completely different part of the world that is much wider than where it is right now.
Okay.
Yes.
I put this in the context of what we're talking about here. This is a statement you make here in this chapter 3, laying out the terrain. Theories of cognition highlight what people think when exposed to a stimulus. Theories of emotion track how the stimulus makes them feel.
Yes. So the context is that if you're listening to the pan and you are listening, let's say somebody's playing Woman on the Bass, right? You know, well tried and tested. You could probably sing some of this song, things like that. It's going to be a cognitive hook for your mind. However, if you were to listen to an arrangement, for instance, all right, let's take away Roman bass arrangement is very famous. Let us say you listen to a random arrangement that you can't actually hook anything into, and you're not distracted by the lime or by the people around, and you're just listening to the instrument itself, then you would start to see how your mind is moving as a result of it being ignited by the sound vibration. Because remember, our thoughts are also vibration. And when we are in the presence of another vibrational stimuli, there's something called entrainment. We vibrate similarly. So there's a whole experiment with different metronomes being put off at different timings, and eventually they all move in sync. So I'm saying that if you are listening to the sound of the instrument, that is a source of vibration. You are also going to entrain with the instrument, and it's going to allow for your brain to operate in a different way.
It has been fabulous. Dr. Savitri Ramprasad, Steel Pan Vibrations, Unlocking the Human Mind.
Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so very much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. This has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
WESN.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really.